everyone, and welcome to another episode of Your Wellbeing Hub's podcast. My name is Sally Desborough, founder and director of Your Wellbeing Hub. We're an organisation that specialises in mental health awareness training, and it is my mission to raise awareness and give people the tools and skills to support themselves, their mental health, and the people around them. I am joined today by the wonderful Alison Roberts, who I've known for a few years now, and I'm very delighted to be joined by her today. A very, I think, innovative, wise, and magical person generally. So, Alison, I don't want to butcher your intro. Can I hand over to you, please?
Thank you, Sally. And big thank you for having me with you today. We met, I think, at least 2 years ago now, when I was on two of your courses on mental health first aid, which I absolutely loved. They gave me a level of insight and real depth and curiosity around the subject that I hadn't had before. So it was a real education. It opened up my mind and it opened up a conversation between you and I as well.
Mhm.
So in terms of my background, just very quickly, I have had a career in sales, in consultancy, in marketing, in senior learning and development. And right now, I'm running my own business, CommsLab, which is all about educating people around a deeper level of human skills and connection.
Love it. Absolutely love it. And it is about that kind of deeper connection, which I find so inspiring more than the kind of more surface level active
Yeah,
listening skills. It's really about that deeper connection and
yeah,
that kind of inner drive and skills. And you mentioned curiosity there, and that's really why we're getting together today, because you put
yeah,
this post out last week or quite recently about curiosity that really kind of stuck with me. And it was great that we've kind of got this time together to talk more on that, because I think there's so much value that this conversation can bring. And if people can take one thing to their
yeah.
lives from this conversation to help somebody else or help themselves, then I think that'd be amazing. So yeah, I'm so happy that you're here today. So I am going to read a line from that post that you put out on LinkedIn. Um,
Sure.
you said that curiosity isn't just a skill, but an inner drive, an energy that has to be pursued. Love that
Yeah.
distinction. Can you unpack that a little bit more for us?
Yeah, I was feeling really inspired actually when I wrote that post, because I had asked myself different questions around my business than I had ever asked before. So I come from a background where I've always been educated to have a really strong work ethic.
Mm.
And what that means is just working hard, keeping going, um, navigating obstacles, understanding that life has its ups and downs. And the question that I asked myself, which, given my background, is not something I would have ever asked before, is how can I make this easy for myself?
Mm.
And it just opened up a whole new way of thinking. Um, and that led me to make some really quite big changes around how I run the business, not just in terms of the back end, all my systems and processes and everything,
Mm.
but how I show up, what my biases are around this work ethic, how that impacts my work, my conversations, my relationships, and so on,
Mm.
my well-being as well. So I just wanted to just make the point that it's an inner drive, it's a state of being, and it is an intention. I think that that's what curiosity is for me.
Yeah.
I think you have to decide to stay curious, because when we're young, I think that we're all born curious. We all, from the age of like 2 or 4, we're all asking those questions around, why?
Yeah.
And um, for some people, that curiosity gets dulled a little bit as we get older.
Mm.
For others, whilst I am a firm believer in curiosity still remaining playful and joyful,
Yeah.
as we get older, if we choose to retain curiosity deliberately and intentionally, it becomes tinged with our experiences, our wisdom, our self-awareness, and our ability to reflect about ourselves and the world that we live in. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much in there. And when you were talking through that around, as children, we're very curious. I immediately thought of being playful and play. And then you said playful later on because we are, what is that? And we are asking all of these questions. And as you say, as we grow older, we pick things up along the way.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think people can get stuck in that kind of, well, we've always done it this way, so that's just the way that we do it. And well, what's the curiosity around, well, how can we do things differently? How can we make things better? How can we improve things and make life easier? And I think some people get stuck, don't they? Because, well, we've always done it this way, so why would we do it any kind of different?
Yeah, and I think you've hit on such a good point there, because one of the things that curiosity does is it prevents rigidity of thinking. And it's an enabler in a way. And because what it does is it can open our thinking, not just to new ways of doing things, new ways of being, of acting, of absorbing information, but it can also be a lever for change, a way of problem solving, that opens up, creativity and new perspectives that we hadn't thought about before. So to me, curiosity it's a facilitator. And it has the ability to give so much to us. Um, in the course that I'm running at the moment, Leading with Connection, one of the things that we have been exploring is the tension that curiosity can create and the discomfort, because it can create challenge and it often does accompany change. And it does call on us to navigate that in a way that is sometimes unfamiliar.
Yeah.
So it's also understanding that, yes, it can be a lever for change and it can facilitate that, but we also have to have the maturity to understand that it can and will inevitably lead us to a level of discomfort, and to have the self-awareness to sit with that when we know we must. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Absolutely love that. And what you're saying makes absolute sense. But I've just never really heard anyone talk about it in this way and say it out loud. But all of that,
Yeah.
it just really connects together. And this inner drive that you talk about, when I think about curiosity, I talk a lot about being curious on my
Yeah.
course, you know, to really try to understand somebody else's world. Because again, we bring our lives,
Yeah.
we bring our experiences to conversations, and actually we need to try to park that to
Yeah.
understand somebody else's world in their life and how they're feeling and all of those good things. And certainly talk about genuineness, how we've got to be genuine in those conversations. Because if we're not genuinely concerned, genuinely wanting to understand this person,
Yeah.
curiosity is probably going to be a lot more difficult to access. And that's that kind of inner drive and that energy that you're talking about. You've got to be genuinely curious. You've got to have that drive and that intent to try to understand that
Yeah.
person.
100%. And I think, to your point, because one of the things that you had asked me about is the difference between questioning and curiosity. And I just wanted to make a point that the questions that you asked me were great. And I know that they came with a level of really deep curiosity that was very natural and very real. But what I have found is that when we think of curiosity as just questioning, again, we're talking about that more surface level capability. And quite often it accompanies a different force. It has a different energy behind it. So we might question, in your world, you would be using questioning from that standpoint of genuinely wanting to know and to help. So it's a service standpoint. Whereas if somebody is using questioning in a sales environment, for example, and there may be early on in their career, they might be reading those questions from a script, or they might be slightly robotic with those questions. And what happens then is that whether it's conscious or unconscious, the person on the receiving end has a perception that this is not real because it's not fueled by genuine curiosity.
Yeah, and then the trust doesn't build and the connection doesn't build, and then the sales
Exactly
isn't
that.
going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. So what, in your view, tends to shut curiosity down in people, and are there ways to overcome that?
Yeah, there are. So I thought that was a really interesting question. And it's very similar to, in my work, I talk about how overthinking can shut down our intuition, our ability to pick up subtext and read the energy of a conversation. And curiosity is actually no different in that respect. So overthinking, and by the way, I'm a huge fan of thinking. This is not to say don't think. This is to say that thinking, like anything, is a skill, and we have to understand that there are advantages and disadvantages. There are times when we can harness it and it's super useful. When we're but overthinking and doubt can block curiosity. And there are other things as well, I think, that can block it that I hadn't thought about before actually having this conversation with you. But I think environment is a really critical one. So if we're not in the right culture or the right team that allows for natural curiosity to emerge, in fact, if it's not supported and encouraged within a team, that can also lead us to shut down curiosity on that front. And what happens then is that we also shut down the creativity, the innovation, all of the amazing problem solving that we touched on earlier that could accompany that. So what we're actually doing is we're shutting down a large chunk of people's capacity when we do just that one thing, when we don't promote a culture of curiosity.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think in that we're talking about, when we're having conversations with people and being curious, is trusting ourselves that we're going to be able to navigate this conversation together. And I think, again, that's when I think about my courses, that's something that I talk to, is actually you have to trust yourself that you're going to be able to have a human conversation with someone, navigate that sensibly and safely and meaningfully, and not get caught up on what question am I going to ask next, and what if they say this, and then you're in that moment, and that can almost make you freeze and not be able to be curious. And we're going to talk about listening and truly listening as well, and that can shut down the listening as well, and letting that kind of just happen.
100%. I think also there's something around character in this, because I have realized in my life that when I ask the sometimes difficult or what might be classed as challenging questions, they're often the questions that people either wanted to be asked or wanted to ask but didn't dare. And whilst I agree with you 99% of the time that when we do ask those questions intuitively and instinctively, they tend to work out. But you also have to be prepared for the 1% of the time where it might get sticky. And this comes back to what I said earlier about we have to be prepared, if we are truly curious, for some, slightly sticky moments sometimes that might that we hadn't anticipated, that might off balance the conversation slightly, but that then comes back to something that you dipped into earlier, which is all around the trust. And if we're real and we are building genuine rapport, that trust is there. And as long as that trust underpins these sticky moments, they're a lot easier to navigate. And look, we can be a really great and confident communicator, but at times like that, our confidence can, suddenly take a little bit of a hit, and we think, that was a bit of a surprise. I didn't expect it to go there.
Yeah.
And so what you said about being real, that's when that really comes into play. It's easy for us to do it when a conversation is going well. It's even more important to step into that service mentality, being real, focusing on connection when things get a little bit sticky. That's how you sustain and preserve longevity in relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love this. I'm loving this conversation. Thank you so much. And when we talk about listening and think about listening, what does really listening mean to you?
So I've had a lot of conversations about this. So you're hitting on my two favorite subjects today. Really listening is not a thing, although I use that term. So the experts say that it is just listening. But you and I know that there are levels of listening. There is different people have a different capacity for listening. We know that we can listen on many levels at the same time. And so in my work, what I teach people to do and what I facilitate is a process where people are listening on many levels. So they're listening with their body, they're listening with their senses attuned. And what that means is, for many people who are on this leadership and learning and development communication journey, many of those people are highly empathic and quite sensitive. So when I talk to them in terms of attuning their listening and increasing their sensitivity, that's not always a comfortable conversation for those people to have, because many of them often feel overly sensitive to the world around them and overly empathize. Yeah. So I enable ways of controlling our sensitivity and therefore attuning our listening to the environment that we're in, the person that we're talking to, even down to how we're feeling on that day. Because even though I do this for a living, I might not want to fully immerse myself in somebody's slipstream, on a day when I haven't had much sleep and I am feeling a little bit, oversensitive.
Yeah.
So to summarize all of that, I do believe there is only listening. And I do believe that it is our duty to practice the deepest possible level of listening that we can to honor the person or the group that we're in front of. That's what I feel it does. I think it's the ultimate respect, and it's the very least we can do for someone else. But I want to highlight that there are conditions that set this up. So if you're busy thinking about the next meeting you've got to go to, or you're shopping, or whatever, what's on your phone, you're not listening. You're not being present. And I think there are other conditions as well. It's not just the internal noise that we need to be aware of. It's the external environment that can impede our ability to listen. It can be our mindset, our state of mind. It It can be our well-being on a number of levels that can impede our ability to listen. So for me, listening starts with intention. Mm-hmm. It starts with being of service. It starts with a silent, open, and receptive mind, because going in with a blank slate means that you are making a commitment to yourself to shelve any biases, misconceptions, conditioning, all the other stuff that we can choose to bring into a conversation. So I'm just going to pause there and just see if there's anything in there that you want to pull up on.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, there's a lot in here, and we know, there's barriers potentially to curiosity, and that can shut down in people. We know there's so many barriers to listening, whether that's, I've got that deadline in 10 minutes and I can't stop thinking about that, or that next meeting, or we bring biases and judgments to conversations. We sometimes walk into conversations having an idea of what the person will need, and actually we don't have an idea of what that person needs, but we kind of walk into those situations. Or, how am I feeling mentally? What's my energy like? What are my stress levels like as well? So there's so many barriers to listening as well. And I can start to see how curiosity and listening start to feed into one another, actually. But again, to listen fully, you've got to have that intent and that drive. To, really listen, to really listen.
But you know what, Sally, I use that word as well. And I think what we're doing, without, getting too pedantic, is we're just emphasizing the importance of it. And it is important. It's at the foundation of all communication. So one of the things that I talk about a lot is around listening with our body, not just our ears, because that to me is the difference between listening and hearing. So, when, and I think you and I have talked about this before, actually, when you hear a song and it's like the emotions of the song penetrate your body, you can kind of feel, the energy like prickling, hot, cold. When you are sitting with someone and you are in a highly focused and completely receptive and present state, you'll pick up the same thing with people. You will pick up that kind of flow, that energy in your body. And to me, all that does is it's confirmation that I am listening and at a sustained and present level. And so I think there are ways of, I know there are ways of getting confirmation that we are paying attention in a way that really honors the other person. And that's just one way that I use.
Yeah. So if somebody wanted to be a better listener, would that be the starting point, do you think, in terms of listening with your body and really showing that?
So I was thinking about this earlier, and actually that is one way, and it is a very good way. But I think my top tip would actually be to listen to yourself first and foremost, to develop the capacity to pay attention to your words, both how you express yourself physically, so like we're doing now, but also your inner compass, your inner voice as well, and get accustomed to paying attention. So there's two things that does. First of all, it strengthens your instincts, which makes both the listening piece and the curiosity piece work a lot better. But when you're in conversation with someone else and you are paying attention to your words, it can simplify them. It can slow down the way you speak, which is especially good in like meetings and, doing presentations and things like that. And it also creates a little bit of space in the conversation, that when you're not listening to your words, like deliberately listening, they tend to all roll out. Now, I'm guilty of that sometimes. Well, of course I am. There's nothing wrong with that. But this is just a little nudge to say, why not try this and see how that works for you, and explore that as a way of developing the way you communicate and connect.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. And I think that's sometimes where feedback can also be really powerful. I remember, delivering a course and I get lots of positive feedback, but we also work on constructive feedback. And one of the bits of feedback was Sally was talking very quickly at times. So
Yeah,
piece of feedback was so helpful because it just made me be more aware of what I was communicating, how I was communicating, just trying to slow down and simplify everything
yeah,
rather than overcomplicating things. So I know sometimes people don't like constructive feedback, but I love it because I want to be the best that I can be and how can I keep improving? And
yeah,
yeah, that just made me kind of stop and take a step back and actually just try to slow down a bit and make my words much more impactful. They didn't have to be so many, but really consider how I could slow down and deliver that message differently, but still get the message across type thing. So no, I think
yeah,
it's really powerful. So I'm much more aware of what I'm saying now. I really try to listen to myself to think about, what am I saying? How am I saying it? Am I delivering the message in the best way that I can? Because ultimately, I want my
mm,
learners to have the best experience they can. So yeah,
yeah,
I think that's such a brilliant piece of advice is yes, stopping, slowing down and thinking about and listening to yourself.
yeah. Yeah. And what that also does is it helps to facilitate that deeper level listening that we were talking about a minute ago. Where you because what it when you are listening to yourself, you are naturally more attuned to your body, and therefore you will pick up, as we said earlier, a lot of the subtext and a lot of the nuances that you're going to miss if you're like 10 to the dozen. So it's kind of serves many different purposes.
So, thinking about the workplace, how can leaders and managers use curiosity and listening to build kind of stronger teams?
So I think the first thing, Sally, and it's such a great question, is with curiosity is to understand the value of it. We've talked about all of the different benefits. Um, so it's to first acknowledge that and then consider how present curiosity really is in the team, how deeply ingrained it is in maybe the values, the team culture, as well as the wider culture, and what adjustments might need to be made in order to accommodate more curiosity. And then to start demonstrating that yourself, because I firmly believe that curiosity is a critical leadership capability. Like, if we're not curious, we're not growing. And if we're not growing, what does that say about us as leaders and our self-awareness? So because curiosity is so good at driving that reflective practice, deeper self-awareness, I think it's our duty. I know it's our duty as leaders to model that first and foremost. And likewise with listening, to look at ourselves first and foremost and really consider how well we're listening, maybe get some 360 feedback from the team, just like you were prepared to do. I mean, we have to ask for these things and we have to be prepared to sit with whatever feedback is given, to consider it. And so, what I like to do is look at these things as experiments and take this feedback and say, okay, I'm going to start with this one area around listening. And I'm going to experiment with implementing different ways to enable the way I listen to have more impact. And then what I do is I take stock of those experiments. I gather the data. Did it work? Did it not work? How are people responding to me? How am I feeling about this? And that comes back again to that curiosity. So one of the things that you'd ask me is how do they both link together? And this, I think, is hopefully answers that question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I said, oh, I can see how curiosity and listening feed into one another. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
kind of that loop, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. And yeah, when it comes to kind of leaders and managers, I think, you know, when you were talking about the culture side of things, what came to me
Yeah.
with psychological safety was team members feeling able to be curious and ask questions and the whys and the what fors
Yeah.
without being shut down, and
Yeah.
that blame culture and pointing the fingers, well, that's gone wrong. Well, let's be curious about, well, what happened and how could we
Yeah.
do things differently, and what did you learn from that, rather than, you know, you did it wrong, it was bad, and, you know, I'm pointing the finger at you and humiliating you in front of everybody. And, you know, that's quite an unhelpful culture. So I think psychological safety was the immediate thing that came to my mind when you were talking.
Yeah.
I might throw you under the bus here because this is a question that I didn't
Yeah.
put
Go
to
for
you
it.
in advance. But if you've got a team member who's really struggling because of that culture of, you know, I don't feel that I can participate in this conversation, I can't raise my voice, I can't ask these questions, are there any tips or advice for a team member who's potentially in that situation, who's wanting to be curious but the culture doesn't allow for it?
Yeah. I I've worked in environments like that, and um, there are things that you can do, but for me personally, it ultimately came down to a choice. And that choice for me was, so I had a talk to my manager at the time and said, you know, my who I am is this. You know, I'm naturally curious. I naturally like to ask questions. And essentially, part of that is because I love solving problems. Um, and I get that people don't always want these things surfaced. So, how about if effectively what I was saying is you move a little bit this way, I move a little bit this way, and we see how that works. So for me, it then became about picking the things that I wanted to surface, my observations, asking my challenging questions, which were all about with positive intent. And I think that's a really important thing to highlight. I mean, it kind of goes without saying, but it's worth mentioning that all this has to be with positive intent. And for my manager, it was about them listening better and understanding that I wasn't there to agitate or disrupt or reinvent the wheel for the sake of it. I was just harnessing my experience, my workplace experience, and my personal experience in relationships, and looking to surface something that I believed might save, you know, the business money, might improve team morale, team cohesion, collaboration, all of these good things.
Yeah.
And it didn't work. It was an experiment. And ultimately, there was a real kind of values and cultural misalignment for me. But what I loved is that he was willing to try. He was willing to try and meet me halfway, and I think that says a lot in itself. So now, since that experience, I am even more careful about aligning myself with the right culture, the right environment that enables me to be completely myself, because I just want to highlight what happens when you can't do that, because I know you do this in your work as well. It's just a good reminder that if you're in an environment that doesn't support curiosity, and in fact, like you said, that kind of admonishes against it and does a bit of finger waving and just doesn't really support it, you will end up making yourself smaller and smaller to fit with the culture. Your light will get dimmer, your energy will reduce, and that can lead to all kinds of health and well-being problems that you and I are only too well aware of. And so that's why I'm just really reinforcing, hopefully, how important it is to make sure that that alignment is there before you step into a new role or team.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. There was so much in there that you were talking about that I could relate to. So, when you're sharing your story, it reminds me of my own story again when I'm listening to you. I'm trying to switch off from my own story and really hear everything that you're saying, but there's so much that I could relate to in that. And yeah, it's I think that last piece around your energy, like every day,
Yeah,
it just feels so much harder the more you're trying to,
yeah,
convince yourself it's going to be a different day, it's going to be a better day. I'm going to go in
yeah,
with a positive mindset, but as soon as you hit that desk and within half an hour, you just feel your energy go. And as hopeful as you might be that things will be different today, if your
yeah,
values don't align and if you feel that you just don't fit in that culture, it really saps your energy. It just takes everything from you to a point where you're physically unwell, you're mentally unwell.
yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's such an important message.
And I think also, as part of that message, it's about what happens afterwards, because um, there is a tipping point with that where we know, and we everyone is aware of this internally, that if I stay this much longer, it's going to put me at risk. And because I think one of the biggest lessons that I understood, because I ended up interviewing whilst I was in the dip, and I understood that it just wasn't working. I found it really difficult to connect with other people because I had made myself so much smaller. And then when you're going for roles that are you, there's a disconnect between who you are in that role and that organization and who you know yourself to be once you're out of that, and understanding that it can take, depending on how close to that tipping point you are, it can take a little while for you to build up your energy again. So what I did is I talked about it to the people that are really close to me, people where there's an energy match, where we connect, the people that I connect with. And it was through them mirroring back who I am when I'm at peak energy that I was able to come back up the other side of that curve, interview and get into the right roles. So I think it's worth highlighting not just the short-term impact, but just the longer-term impact of that kind of environment.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's so much to take away from that. And again, I can totally relate to when you're in that dip. And I had to take several months of doing nothing actually.
Yeah,
I was looking at jobs and I was like, I could do that job, but I just can't connect to it. And I don't see how I would be happy in that role. And
yeah,
it took several months for me to actually, well, and that's the point where I actually set up my business because I think I had totally burnt out of I just don't see myself ever being happy in that role because I'd just been in such a decline for, it was a long time, it was
yeah,
a time and it was that final year where I really just kind of took that dip and yeah, couldn't do it anymore. And I totally burnt out and could not connect to HR anymore. That was it really. So
yeah.
yeah, I'm grateful for the journey now, but you don't wish any of those thoughts or feelings or physical
No,
um, illness on anybody. So I think you're right. It's recognizing, having that self-awareness, listening to yourself, listening to your body, listening to your mind,
yeah,
what's going on, what's happening. And
yeah,
this is it. I see more and more of it in different forums of people saying, I've resigned from my job, I've got nothing to go to, but I just can't do this anymore. I've got nothing, I can't give anymore. So
yeah,
I don't know if that's a wise thing to do, but my health and well-being is compromised, and the longer I stay here, the more unwell I'll become. So I see that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that it's interesting because that was a point that I wanted to pick up on the curiosity side. I was talking to somebody about this the other day, and especially in my industry, learning and development, and but I sense that within the UK, the economy is going through a little bit of a challenging time right now. And she was telling me that the trigger point for a lot of the people that she knows, so people in their, late 30s to late 40s, is as they're approaching that burnout and that low energy state, is asking some of the really big questions and having curiosity around who am I? Why am I here? What's my purpose? And I think of those. So for me, those questions are what have brought me here.
Yeah.
They what took me on this path very, very early on in my career. But I think that those are important questions to ask, not just when our energy is low. I think that those are important, deep questions that we should be reflecting on as leaders on and off throughout our lives to ensure that there is alignment
Yeah.
and to make space for our development. Because I was reading a stat. I work with senior leaders, and I was reading a stat that only 26% of senior leadership devote any kind of time to their own personal development. And it shocked me. It really, really did shock me. I'll dig out the stat for you. Because I think both of these things go in hand. Like our professional development needs to be aligned with who we are as people and how we're growing and developing. So all of that to say that having curiosity around those big life questions, not necessarily at the times when we are approaching burnout and we have to ask those questions, but also before that time can help us to keep our balance a little bit better and remain in better health.
Oh, that's such a brilliant message because you're so right. When I think about it, think about it. I mean, I do think about, what am I doing and how am I moving forward and do I want to do
Yeah,
it differently? But certainly the biggest piece of my, that life change in 2019 was what is this all about? Why am I doing this? Why do I continue to put myself in a situation or an environment that I find toxic and I can't be my authentic self,
yeah,
where I don't feel understood? And it was when kind of in that point that I asked those big questions, and that was the turning point. But actually making sure that shows up when we are well and think about how do I continue to grow?
yeah.
Yeah.
I also just want to say that that is the power in what you do and who you are, because what you've done is you've taken that powerful, powerful message that so many people resonate with, myself included, and you have woven that in to your work so that this is your business. This is how your business has evolved. And um, I believe that some of the most important messages that we're here to bring, messages of hope and of survival in, within as we emerge out of challenging situations. They come from asking those big questions, reflecting on our experience, appreciating that we are both more resilient and more vulnerable than we maybe considered we were, and then taking that message out so that so that it resonates. And that can only be done by getting curious about it. So, yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. I'm so aware of the time and I could talk to you all day. I'm going to ask you one more question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
One more question. What's a question you wish people would ask you more often?
Um, I would love people to ask me more questions about how to listen, how to connect at these deeper levels. But many people that I come across do not realize that they have the capacity for more. They have the capacity to listen at these deeper, energetic, more intuitive levels. And that once they harness that and bridge that with all of the skills that they've accumulated up to this point, they have a powerful combination that will future proof not just themselves in the workplace, but will bring so much to their personal relationships. But people don't ask that question because they don't know what they're missing. So my message today is I was missing it and I found it and I speak about it. So if you're curious about how you can develop so my message is get curious about how you can develop those deeper level skills and then find someone like me or you to talk to about it.
Oh, I love it. Do you know what? I've learned so much today and no doubt so many takeaways for everyone else. So thank you so much for sharing all of your insights and wisdom. What a joy it's been today. So thank you so much.
Likewise. Now, thank you so much as well.
Catch up soon.